Warning! This is a 100% serious review about a softcore straight furry romance visual novel, and there are no scenes of sexual activity in this video. Like the guy who spoils movies at the theater without a second thought, nobody likes a dick. Okay, except for people like, anyway, you're probably wondering how this all happened. Before we go straight into the game, there is a story about how this review came to be. You see, despite the obvious associations, I never imagined I would talk about this game, let alone get a review copy. Originally, I had pitched the idea as a joke, and after playing what remains an exceptionally well-made demo and seeing the tasteful adult content, my expectations were surprisingly high. Even after 2 to 3 weeks of a delayed release due to a submission error with Steam, nothing diminished my sincerest wishes that this game would be another visual novel to show me that you shouldn't judge a game by its cover. Unfortunately, this game did prove that point, except for all the wrong reasons. And what began as an innocent joke ultimately made me feel like a disenchanted fool. Having already shown my proverbial cards, I want to quickly follow up that information by stating that my expectations did not cause my own disappointment. What disappointed me were the numerous bugs, the unfinished nature of the game, and the severe lack of content, as well as the overall dissolution of its former structure. Even if this game released into early access, I would still find the state of the game unacceptable for purchase. The only saving graces about this game are that Something to Do with Love is the developer's first gaming project, not his first animated work, as well as the fact that he has responded favorably to criticism. Hopefully, this video will also be positively received despite the negativity, as there is a project worth salvaging. Additionally, the developer has made the game more stable with each update, and he has stated future ideas for content, which makes me wonder why, if not for time and monetary constraints, the game had to come out. However, until said improvements have been updated, I can only review the game as it is. One last side note, it wasn't until I played the game that I learned a friend of mine bought one of the town NPCs as a backer reward. But I don't view this as any conflict of interest because this person did not work on the game. Obviously, I won't feature the character out of respect. So unless you want to purchase the game in the future, or you are not convinced about how bad it is, the rest of this review will illustrate how and why this game disappointed me, rather than earning the ire it probably deserves. Now I know what many of you are probably thinking when it comes to judging adult-rated games with any sort of standards.
Degenerates like you belong on a cross.
Okay, besides the obvious meme response, you're probably wondering, what did you expect and why talk about these games in the first place? Like many of you, I once balked at the idea of adult-rated games becoming popular, although not for any puritanical reasons, and my greatest concern was for games involving anthropomorphic characters. With various cartoon aesthetics aimed at younger audiences, and with many games using said characters for non-adult games, my worst fear was that the mere association and the various online algorithms would make developers think twice about creating these types of characters. Although since when has that stopped the internet from twisting any innocent idea for adults? However, since Valve has unleashed the floodgates for Steam, believe me, I am happy with that decision. And as adult games are becoming more accepted like Subverse, I have slowly come around to accept the idea that perhaps selling adult games on popular storefronts with certain restrictions is not a horrible outcome. Now we could discuss how games have been traditionally viewed as products for children, or how many games and publishers refuse to adopt adult ESRB ratings while also pushing the boundaries for the mature tag. But those topics are outside the scope of this review. What is important is that the adoption of selling games with explicit adult purposes will require reviewers to treat these games as legitimate products, which is another discussion that could be its own video. In fact, many games already do walk that uncomfortable line for reviewers, such as the Senua Kagura series, and it's important to treat these games like any other with little to no moral outrage, so they not only improve as games, but also let customers know what products are worth supporting. Perhaps this statement is an idealistic fantasy, and if my track record for reviewing these types of games have proven anything, reality continues to leave me disillusioned.
So uncivilized.
In all seriousness, describing something to do with love as an adult game would be somewhat misleading, because there is nothing more titillating here than what you would find in The Witcher or the Mass Effect series. The only major difference, besides the target audiences, is that one game was based off the same characters and world from an adult animation, probably using the same 3D models, whereas the others treat romance as a side fling to the main adventure. Some people might say that the major difference is that those other games have an actual story to tell, or someone might bring up that infamous John Carmack quote. However, as I'm clearly a connoisseur of the finest decadent arts, and unlike my film peers, I like my adult films like I enjoy my drinks. 1 ounce of bitter sweetness, a long tall tale, and 20 gallons of self-humiliation. That statement, kinda like this section, is one long convoluted way to say that I enjoy a good story no matter what form it may be, which is still more coherent than the story in Something to Do with Love, as it is unfortunately the most lacking quality. Hold on, am I really playing that song here? Even for me, that joke is too dark. Since this review has already illustrated the game's problems, it would be fair to discuss some of the more positive qualities, starting off with the presentation. Unlike the many visual novels using 2D sprites and multiple facial portraits to express emotions, all the characters here have 3D models with simple animations. These characters are set against pre-rendered backgrounds with some small animated touches to make the setting feel lively. Sometimes the game will utilize various camera techniques like fisheye lenses to convey depth. The camera's motion blur can be a little nauseating to tolerate when panning the screen, but it thankfully doesn't move too often. While the idea may sound strange, if you have played any classic Resident Evil games, then you will be accustomed to the format, and the usage of simple point-and-click controls helps to keep things simple. Similar to how inviting the visuals are for the eyes, the sound design throughout is also easy on the ears. Most of the credit is due to Maru's soundtracks, which are as calming as the grazing of soft waves at your feet while lying on the beach one late summer afternoon. Although what you're probably more interested in is the overall quality of the voice acting, and thankfully, most of the lines are handled well when the voice actors are present.
Yeah. If you need a ride back, I'll be good to drive. Seriously, what the fuck is so funny? Okay. So at the pub, right, there's this guy who's way over the limit and his friends are playing keep away with his car keys, and he's having none of it. And he keeps yelling, "I'm good to drive! I'm good to drive!" Just repeating it over and over and over. So whenever somebody is really drunk, we say they're good to drive. Like, dude, how drunk are you? Me? I'm good to drive. What happened to the drunk guy? Was he okay?
That drunk guy was me.
You don't have a driver's license, Carl.
Yeah, I'm at the stage of just saying shit right now. I'm good to drive.
I love it when a story comes full cycle.
For the most part, however, all random NPCs and random moments with the main characters lack any voice acting, which is probably for the best. Outside of that concession, the presentation is of high quality despite the numerous design decisions that interferes with its own efforts. Unfortunately, and if the screen resolution didn't already give this information away, the 80s aesthetic hampers the game's technical qualities. Besides the 4:3 aspect ratio, you can thankfully turn off the more performance-heavy and eye-grating settings such as bloom, fill grain, and lens flare. It's difficult to find fault with these decisions because they fit the time period as well as the fact that the protagonist, Will, works at a video rental store during the era of VCRs. Even if you accept that reasoning, it's a great disservice to the game's visual quality to be harmed by its archaic limitations. Additional resolution options would be appreciated, although a simple widescreen stretch patch would only make the problem worse. These small problems, however, are only the tip of the impending iceberg. Another surprising notable quality is that the game has some well-written dialogue if you enjoy slice-of-life storytelling, although these moments are more sparse than the pleasant visuals. Now this quality will vary depending on your taste for down-to-earth dialogue, as well as the many personalities you encounter. If there wasn't an abundance of see you later exchanges from both major and minor NPCs, then I would be more interested in talking with every character. Some of these more vivid exchanges are less cringeworthy thanks to the addition, or the omission, of decent voice acting, which are limited to the main cast and to certain scenes.
Oh my god, I'm not funny. Aha, let there be light. Who said that line? I forget.
God, I think.
Oh yeah, duh.
Of the 4 girls to choose from, there is a lot of charming dialogue, attention to detail in verbal mannerisms and body language, and fleeting character building moments to make their interactions a treat in of itself. Perhaps my favorite exchange was from May as she described her open relationship as renting Terminator 2. And yes, this metaphor would later imply that she is the VCR. If the dating system was more fleshed out to work with the meager amounts of good writing to build those interpersonal connections, then this result would greatly enhance the climactic moments. Sadly, dates become rehashed conversations that will quickly lose their luster with each passing day. Wait a second, was that social commentary? No, I'm giving the game way too much credit. Quite honestly, my biggest gripes would be resolved if there was simply more of these entertaining exchanges, as well as things to do within the game, outside the other major gameplay and technical shortcomings. To truly understand how deflating this game was to play, you would have to play the demo in order to understand the situation, because the final product undoes everything the demo did so well. So let's begin this section from there. The first demo introduced the main characters as well as set up the plot taking place before a 4th of July weekend party. You were introduced to 3 of the 4 main side characters as well as the potential conflict between Neil and May. Afterwards, a second version expanded the first 2 days of the game with what felt like a taste of the free roaming aspect of the town, as well as the choices you could make to shape the narrative, a few surprises to find if you explored thoroughly, and the game was relatively bug-free. You can imagine my shock when I discovered that those 2 days were 2/3 of the actual content, whereas the rest of the game can only be best described as an early midlife crisis or a Groundhog Day simulator. This realization will not be made clear because the game never informs you that the story is over past day 3, or day 5 if you follow May's story. Even more confusing, you might not even understand what happened due to the game's buggy nature, which leaves you in its own purgatory where you keep playing day after day, hoping something will change or you will discover something new, until you inevitably suffer an existential crisis from all the monotony. While there are 3 main deviations for the main characters on day 2, these changes are so insubstantial and so subtle that it doesn't surprise me how some people can play this game for 20+ hours and never realized the story had long been over. Someone once described playing a Bethesda Softworks game at release as suffering from Schrodinger's bug, where the line of what is and what is not a bug is blurred. That same type of problem is how I would describe something to do with love, because most of the game-breaking bugs come from day 1 and 2, which were previously stable during the demo. These problems include random crashes such as choosing no to go to bed, inconsistent bugs, and more crashes after talking to the random NPCs in one specific area, visual glitches or scripting errors that cause certain scenes to not function properly, or other potential issues in a game without an autosave feature. After those poor early impressions, it's surprising that the rest of the experience, by contrast, only suffers an occasional scripting bug. It's only the beginning that seems to suffer the most technical problems. You wouldn't realize this problem while playing, nor would you realize how much the game pads itself out with its free roaming and modern life schedule until the player has effectively wasted their time. This form of padding isn't the only instance of this problem. As mentioned previously, so many exchanges can boil down to an excuse not to talk to you, and what makes this annoyance worse is that there are no indications for new dialogue. Characters are not found at predetermined areas, nor do they have pre-scripted lines. They simply spawn randomly every time you enter and leave a doorway, and they either spout character-specific lines or random filler. Additionally, some areas outside of town are unused, yet you can freely explore them whenever, prompting the player to expect that he or she will later have a reason to go there. You don't even need to show up for work at the video store. You can just sleep in and the next day loops over as if nothing happened. Which these sections are another moment for the game to artificially pad itself out by having you do nothing. After work, there is nothing to do except hang out with May if you can even find her. And not even the bar, which is only available at night, offers anything to do. All these instances are, at best, obfuscations to what is the actual substance of the game. And even if you are only interested in the saucier content, you will find several problems. Once you have completed the second night, the options for the 4 girls simply vanish. You might expect this statement to mean that there is some sort of commitment system, or this aspect is part of the storytelling, but the reality is nothing like what you'd think. The options to hang out, chat, or fraternize with the girls outside of May doesn't work past day 2, with the exception of Autumn because her story happens later. After that one special scene, all the girls outside of May will simply tell you they are too busy, or they cannot remember what they wanted to say. Again, this type of problem begs the question whether this is a bug, part of the story arc for the characters, or the game punishing you for not staying with one girl because May is the only one who seems open to that kind of relationship. This result gives the story an overall incomplete impression as the inciting incidents have barely begun, nor does the game provide you any sense of closure. Perhaps this problem is why the community straw poll had most people asking for more love scenes. Maybe that also means more stories with the 4 girls, than added gameplay features or additional side content. However, the real problem is that there is so much missing, you cannot help but think that this game ran out of time as the current state is the mere cobbling together of a half-functioning game with too many underdeveloped ideas. You know, the thought occurs to me that as someone who doesn't understand the appeal of most visual novels, perhaps I, much like the game itself, has lost the script of what is actually important to the audience. However, are my expectations for a complete story too much to ask? If I was being exceedingly generous with my estimate for the amount of content available, including the multiple paths, then you would get a solid 3 hours at most. To enjoy that meager amount of content, you would also have to endure what is perhaps 3 times as much padding to savor whatever there is to enjoy. In the grand scheme of games for 2019, Something to Do with Love isn't the worst game I've ever played. It is, however, the most disappointing. Perhaps with enough updates, this visual novel will become something more worth its price tag with time. Yet we already have enough live services to feel incomplete. Not to mention the worst live service of all, life itself.